So I've talked a lot about character design on this channel by this point, but a subject I really haven't touched on a ton is what it means for a character's design to get updated for a game's sequel. Part of that is just that we don't really get sequels anymore in the same way we used to. The live service model has meant a huge increase in the amount and variety of cosmetics we might get for a character over their lifetime, but their base design rarely, if ever, gets an actual genuine sequel update. And when it comes to character design, to be clear, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Gamers born before 2008 or so will almost certainly have had the experience of watching their favorite character get fucking ruined by a sequel's atrocious redesign. Naomi in Fusion Frenzy 2, I am looking at you, we are not done fighting just yet. However, that doesn't mean it's all bad either. The big advantage of sequels, particularly in genres like fighting games, is that it allows for the developer to change up the art style and keep things fresh, and in some ways, allow for the evolution of the characters themselves via their outfits. This was especially impactful as fidelity increased, where you could see palette swap characters like Melina, Katana, and Jade from Mortal Kombat diverge more and more to become increasingly distinct in each sequel. As well, while consistency is an advantage of a long-running live service game just not needing to put out a sequel and redesign everyone, that also assumes that what you started with was something that's still good a decade later, and games like League of Legends have had to go back to old characters and cosmetics to overhaul them dramatically to match the quality of more recent stuff as a result. Sequels allowed for consistency across all characters with regular updates to their base designs, which just isn't the case in the exclusively live service model. However, one exception to this that has gotten a sequel recently is Overwatch. Well, not recently, I guess. This video is coming out on the 3-year anniversary of when Overwatch 2 was released, and coincidentally, it's also the 3-year anniversary of when I decided to start making content again. Funny how those 2 days line up. I've talked about Overwatch's character design a bunch of times on this channel, about how it's what carries the game, how its characters are sexualized, how it does a good job creating diverse designs, and a whole lot of critique around how it monetizes its cosmetics. But I've never really explored how Overwatch navigated the move from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2. Plus, I just haven't really done much Overwatch content in general lately, so it feels like it might be nice to return to it to explore the subject on this, the day of its and my 3rd anniversary. So that's what we're doing here, exploring how games update character designs for a sequel using Overwatch as our primary topic of conversation. Before we get into it, just as a note, I'm doing a bit of an anniversary donathon for the month of October. Here's some of the incentives and rewards for donating, some of them are hidden because of fun reveals later on. If you want to learn more about it, I'll get into it at the end of the video though, along with some other fun updates. If this is your first time watching this video though, I would recommend watching it all the way from start to finish first instead of just skipping to the end. With that said, let's get started. Part 1. Where did we start? Character design is one of those jobs that's a lot more complicated than it might seem, especially when you're starting from scratch. If you're making a piece of media in a franchise that already existed, you'd have the advantage of being able to design characters that can build off of what's already there. When it's a brand new IP, you have the added challenge of not only having to make compelling characters, but also having to make sure their designs are cohesive and communicate what this new universe is all about, particularly in terms of establishing the outer boundaries of what people can expect. You can really see this in Overwatch 1's starting roster. You had characters like Tracer and Winston who communicated these sci-fi futuristic tech aspects. You had characters like Cassidy and Reinhardt who communicated that there would also be retro aspects that would call back to older archetypes of fighters like cowboys and knights. You had characters like Hanzo and Genji who communicated that Japan can do magic, and so on and so forth. Every character design process starts as a combination of brainstorming concepts and sketching out ideas. Sometimes the first idea is the best idea, but oftentimes character designs evolve dramatically over the course of the game's development. When we look back on the game that Overwatch was supposed to be before it became Overwatch, we can see characters like Tracer have stayed relatively consistent, but others like Mercy have changed pretty significantly. Part of this is that the vision for the game changed over time, so different designs and principles were needed to communicate what the game was evolving into. But part of it is also just that it's hard to get it right the first time, especially if the process starts with a non-artist determining what they want or need, and then going to the artist to try and get it to happen. As the project continues, people tend to fall into more of a rhythm. They fall into sync with one another, for better or for worse. Blizzard has recently sparked some controversy over their comments that, going forward, they want to create less oddballs, which a lot of people have interpreted as them saying they want to stop creating characters like Winston or Hammond and start relying on more conventionally attractive ones like Lifeweaver or Wuyang going forward. And on the topic of non-artists in the character design process, I can speak from some experience here. When I first wanted to get into VTubing, I had never designed a character before for anything outside of in-game character creators, and I did not do a good job in those character creators, to be very clear. Like, a lot of oversaturated colors and absurd outfits going on in Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I had no idea what to do, and I am absolutely not an artist myself. What's more, there was actually a language barrier between myself and my model artist, so a lot of it came down to me doing my best attempt to sketch something out, find references that looked like what I actually wanted, and then trial and erroring my way to the final product. For example, this is what my sketch looked like. It was really, really bad. And I'm not saying that to be self-deprecating, I'm saying that to be honest. I found a random generic body outline online and then traced Kedamoto's face onto it, plus Sylvain's hair and Claude's braid thing because I had just genuinely no idea how to do a face or hair. And this is actually an important point to make too. Character design is the physical attributes of the characters themselves as much as it is their clothing. Things like face shape, skin tone, eye color, hair color, and so much more are really important to lock in properly, because they're the sorts of details that will almost certainly persist across multiple iterations and redesigns. You need to decide on height, weight, complexion, and so much more before you can really get into the little details. And that goes double if this character has to actually serve a mechanical purpose in a game. Tracer and Reinhardt have to be built different, because Tracer needs to be a speedy, hard-to-hit DPS, and Reinhardt needs to be a big, beefy tank hero who can absorb a lot of bullets. For a VTuber model, it's a little bit different. You have to think about how much of you will be showing on screen, and how much of the screen you can afford to take up. Models with big wings or a big collar or even just giant shoulders can block out a lot of the screen on a stream, and that has to be taken into account too. You also have to consider what will or won't be workable for stuff like art commissions in the future. The more complex your design is, the more expensive comms will become, and sometimes you straight up can't get artists to do certain things. Sometimes this is because the design is just too complicated to replicate, but it also must needs be remarked that some artists will refuse to draw black characters, or will whitewash them no matter how many skin color references are provided. But that is a whole other can of worms that we can't get into right now. And that brings us back to clothing actually, because while physical attributes can tell us things about a character, clothing is a part of self-expression, both in the real world and in fiction. Reinhardt choosing to wear this armor and Cassidy choosing to dress like a cowboy and Reaper choosing to dress like a big edgelord all tell us something about them. How much skin does a character show? How tight-fitting is their clothing? What references do you want to include? And that's without even getting into color, which is a massive part of the discussion. Every color is going to mean something to the audience, whether it's Sombra's purple hues reflecting purple's connotation of distortion or corruption, see the Rasputin video in the card for more on that, or Mercy's white and yellow reinforcing her angelic concept, or green being used on characters like Genji or Lucio to indicate a connotation of speed. And balancing how you use colors in a character's design is really hard. Like, not to keep bringing it back to the model or anything, but part of why he's dressed like this is both to reflect the personality I wanted to communicate, but also to try and balance his colors and branding. The whole idea was that he'd be wearing this bodysuit, a vest, which got deleted by the artist during the process for some reason, maybe it's for the best, honestly probably is for the best, a jacket, those sleeve things, his pants, and his boots. The bodysuit is the only part of this whole thing that was mostly my own idea, building off of something I'd seen on the VTuber Shiabun's old design. The jacket came from Sombra because at the time I was an Overwatch creator and predominantly focused on Sombra, so I wanted to incorporate her into my design. The spiraling cutouts on the pants and the mismatched boots came from the Glitterati dance crew in Dance Central 2. The detached sleeve things were just because it felt really weird for him to not have anything on his arms, and even though I don't really follow Vocaloids, I'd seen those on a few of them and I thought it was cool, so they got incorporated as well. I wanted him to look like he's technically wearing something revealing, but not actually showing very much skin. The lore I originally had in mind for him was kind of this cyberpunk light bartender in a gay bar. Not because he needed the money, but because he liked the attention, and so that's kind of why he looks the way he does. When it comes to colors specifically, I wanted to convey this vibe of neon lights at night, which is why he's in all black with really bright pink and green accents. Pink and green are meant to be his main colors, but when you're going this saturated, sometimes less is more. You can see this with a lot of Overwatch characters as well. Sombra's is obviously purple, but it's not just bright purple, she has a lot of layers to it, a lot of dimension. Tracer's color is orange, but with a bunch of other hues and shades on her as well. Very little of my model is pink or green compared to how much black is in his design, but those are the colors that are meant to represent him, not the black. It also ties into the branding. The whole brand is neon rose, and pink and green are rose colors, so pretty easy to put the dots together on that one, I hope. In my mind, I wanted to do something lore-wise with them, but I don't really have the resources for it, so maybe another time, who knows. However, practicality is also a pretty big part of this, as I touched on earlier. Reinhardt needs to be big because he needs to fit a gameplay purpose, and Tracer needs to be small for the same reason, but it also goes way beyond that. The most obvious example is the difference between designing for 2D versus 3D, but that is a video for another time. Instead, I'll focus more on practicality in terms of what the people and hardware involved can handle. Like, obviously it wasn't ideal for Mortal Kombat's ninjas to originally all just be palette swaps of one another, but that was all they could do with the hardware of the time, that was all it could handle. Alternatively, in a game like In Stars and Time that's in black and white pixel art, you need to design around the fact that you can't use colors or fine lines for your in-game sprites a lot of the time. For my model, I was a broke boy, so I couldn't afford to pay for a professional rigger. Instead, I built my design in a way that I could rig it myself, focusing on tight-fitting fabrics on the bodysuit and pants so that I wouldn't have to animate them, and stiff fabric for the boots and jackets so they wouldn't need to flow much. The only really fluid-ish part of the model is the hair, and good fucking god, rigging the hair was a nightmare. Like, I still think back on that and cannot believe I was willing to put up with that. It sucks. Sometimes people act shocked that riggers charge as much as they do, but frankly, it is shocking that they don't charge more. A company like Blizzard doesn't have to worry about that side of things as much. Logistically, when it comes to a game like Overwatch, the challenge isn't how do we work within our own limitations as much as how do we design a game that people can actually play. And that brings me to the next section of this video. Part 2. Clear communication and hardware accommodation. One of the perpetual obstacles for game designers is the reality that more than any other medium, they have to really work around the limitations imposed by non-standardized consumer hardware. Movies and TV shows are both affected by this sort of stuff too. Check out this very good video by Noodle about screen ratios if you want to learn more. But it's not like a director has to worry about creating a movie that literally cannot play on a certain TV because it uses too much computing power in the way that a video game does. Aspect ratios are really the closest analogy here, and even then, that's a matter of optimal presentation rather than whether or not it can be presented at all. What's more, the hardware, both the console and the displays they use, would have to be able to communicate what's actually happening on screen. The youths here might not remember, but as someone who was a child back when flat screen plasma TVs were being presented as the peak of technological luxury, I very much so do remember this being a struggle. A game had to be recognizable in terms of characters, maps, and general gameplay on anything from a tiny CRT with a built-in VCR at 10p to someone's big living room TV. Guess which one I was playing Fusion Frenzy on as a child? Historically, there was also a third factor of limitation on this, namely physical distribution. Old Pokemon games just couldn't use distinct sprites for every single NPC because they had to be able to fit the entire game on a cartridge that could barely hold a PNG today. Original Lara Croft is so pointy because you could not fit the polygons necessary for natural human proportions and curves on a disc. Nowadays, that's less of an issue thanks to digital distribution, and just improvements in general in storage, but the consumer hardware side of things is still a factor. A game doesn't have to be able to fit everything on a disc, but it does still have to be able to run on the kinds of hardware that people actually have, and it still has to be visually recognizable and clearly communicate what's happening. Games like Cyberpunk 2077 demonstrate this really well by not doing that. Some people, like myself, had an alright time at launch because I had a pretty powerful PC, but if you were unfortunate enough to be playing on a last-gen console, then you were playing a terrible, ugly slideshow that was constantly trying to set itself on fire. One of the big advantages of sequels, then, is that they allow for a reimagining of a character's design a few more years down the road when the developers are able to coax more polygons and VFX out of the consoles and PCs playing their game without starting a small fire. They aren't limited in 2025 to whatever design decisions were made in 2016 out of necessity, and can instead focus on realizing their truest, or at least most current, vision. If anything, current technology actually creates an opposite problem to what games used to have. Namely, old games force developers to edit their character designs a bit. Keep it simple, stupid is a slogan for a reason, and back in the day, it was the only option if you wanted to ship for consoles and PCs. Nowadays, there's not nearly as many hard limits on what you can do, so the new challenge is for people to learn how to actually edit their thoughts down. This is complicated by the fact that character designers have also gotten much better at using much more complicated technology over the years to try and get these things to work, meaning that animation practices, visual effects, and more are on the table in ways they just straight up weren't in the past. This is another thing that's really easy to see with VTubers actually. Even just a few years ago when I started, artists and riggers weren't always able to do what they can today in terms of complexity, and when they could, they were charging a lot more. And a lot of VTubers didn't have the hardware to handle it either. When I first started, I used my iPhone 12 for my face tracking, and it would literally burn through its entire battery within a single stream. And God forbid I tried to charge it while streaming. It would overheat to the point of needing to be put in the freezer for a while before it would be usable again. If you go back and watch some of the earliest streams where I was trying to do it, where I was trying to hide the fact that I was doing it because I wanted it to be a surprise, there were a bunch of times where I had to go pause and disappear, and I was like, oh, I had to go solve a problem. The problem was that my phone was burning itself into a crisp. Nowadays, my iPhone 14 Pro can handle this shit just fine. The software for VTube Studio has improved, the hardware I use is improved, and now, honestly, I could probably go for a pretty significantly more complex design if I really wanted to. The flip side of that is, of course, that a lot of VTubers tend to fall into the same trap as any other kind of character designer. Namely, not knowing how to edit. A lot of VTubers see the opportunity to do more as an obligation to do more, and you end up with these overcomplicated, often unreadable designs. Visual clarity is important, and as technology gets better, it becomes harder to exercise the necessary restraint to maintain it. This means that while the initial Mortal Kombat ninjas were simple palette swaps of one another, future games could afford to give each ninja a fully unique design in terms of hair, clothing, skin, abilities, and more. The advantage is obviously that this allows for characters to be more interesting, but the disadvantage is that sometimes the very basic character design elements used in a previous game will need to be redesigned to not look goofy as shit in the context of improved fidelity. And that can mean you can lose some of what made them iconic. Scorpion in his Mortal Kombat 1 outfit, and we're talking about the real Mortal Kombat 1, not the 2023 reboot that was named Mortal Kombat 1 that's actually the 12th mainline game. Ed Boon, you are not seeing heaven, and I will make sure of that, would look goofy next to characters who have fully fleshed out designs in modern games. This means you can't just pull like a computer enhance thing with them either. You need to be actively redesigning them in a way that maintains their original concept and their original design while still adapting and updating it. To bring it back to Overwatch, most characters received relatively minor updates. For Hero Shooter in particular, that visual clarity is really important, and that goes double for Overwatch since all the old cosmetics got ported over to the sequel as well. Everyone's also still maintained their same color scheme from before. Sombra is still purple, Soldier is still blue, Tracer is still orange, and that means that it's more about updating and adjusting the details, the accessories, we could say. This is especially important for making sure that the old characters don't look out of place next to the new ones. Original Lucio might look a bit outdated next to Lifeweaver without an adjustment, so it's meant to bring them all up to the same standard for base designs. And color genuinely is one of the most important parts of all of this, like I talked about in that old video about how Overwatch's character design is carrying the game. If I showed up here one day with a new design where I was like wearing some purple jacket with orange and white accents, it wouldn't look recognizably like me. If I were ever going to redesign my model, I'd probably have to still stick to the same basic color scheme, primarily black with pink and green accents. Same goes for stuff like logos and iconography. Sombra maintains her digitized sugar skull, and if I were ever going to get a redesign, I'd probably want to try and maintain stuff like my little flower design logo thing. In fact, I'd probably actually want to incorporate it more. Like, when I first came up with this design, I didn't have a logo, that came after, so it'd be kind of nice to have it actually be part of my design. I like it a lot. Otherwise, even if I'm still me, I wouldn't look like me, the same way that Sombra in yellow or Melina in orange just wouldn't look right. That goes beyond outfits as well. Body types are a really tricky part of this equation because arguably even more than clothing, they're going to be influenced by a given game's artistic style. Mortal Kombat 9 and Mortal Kombat X had a dramatic change in body types, and while I didn't hate it as much as some people did, I did kind of prefer the over-the-top aesthetics of 9. Not that you can tell from my model, who is about as twinkish as they come. However, you can kind of tell what I mean when it comes to some of the art I've gotten for him. Like, here's the model in his basic form, but here's how he's drawn in his reference sheet by Renishi. Here's how he's drawn by Gasai for an art piece I got. Sometimes he's very twinkish, like in this piece by Felix Rizzi, and sometimes he's a bit more buff, like in this one by Darian Jai. To be honest, if I did get a redesign for him, he'd probably be a bit more twunkish, just because that's kind of what I was originally going for. But also, it would probably take some time to adjust to seeing me go from this little guy to a beefcake. However, as always, the risk is that moving too far too fast will alienate the audience. You can succeed on clear communication and being able to run things, but that doesn't mean it'll actually be good, does it? Part 3. Oh, people don't always love change. Mortal Kombat X is a pretty dramatic example of it, but it happens for basically any sequel to any game. Like, I remember back in the day when Halo 4 was getting ripped for removing Master Chief's codpiece, even though it looked entirely fine and it was bizarre that that was what people were fixating on. When a game's art style changes for a sequel, characters will inevitably see some parts of their design adjusted to accommodate it. And it is really, really easy to make sure that absolutely nobody's going to be happy with it. My personal worst example of this, the one that really affected me, is Fusion Frenzy, like I mentioned at the top, where the first game had this very cool, stylized Y2K aesthetic, and then in the sequel, the characters all look like they're on Love Island in space. Even if you maintain consistency in stuff like color, body type, hairstyle, and skin tone like Fusion Frenzy 2 did, stylistic changes can be a real problem if it loses the charm of the original aesthetic. The flip side of this would be Mario, which maintains consistency to a fault for its characters. Outside of unique outfits, the basic designs for Mario, Luigi, Peach, Daisy, Bowser, or basically any of the dozens of other Mario characters have remained consistent for literally generations. Like, Donkey Kong's kind of the only one I can think of who's really seen a pretty dramatic change in his design over the years, and Nintendo's just spent the better part of the last half century applying polish rather than trying to substantially iterate on most of those designs. When it came to Overwatch though, you kind of ended up with the opposite problem in a lot of ways. Overwatch simultaneously changed too much and not enough for a lot of people, with the introduction of 5v5 and the new push mode, plus reworks for a handful of characters being jarring for a lot of them. But also, the game looked functionally pretty similar to how it always had. Characters got aesthetic adjustments, but they were too heavily constrained by the need to maintain consistency with their Overwatch 1 designs on account of all those cosmetics being carried forward for any really dramatic changes. A clean break visually probably actually would have helped Overwatch 2, which got whacked a lot for being both a pointless sequel that didn't need to exist, but also fucking up what people liked. Like, if they'd redesigned everything, if it had been a new aesthetic, even if it had just been a subtly different one, it probably would have helped people feel like a sequel was worth actually creating, you know? Overwatch also created a lot of this problem for itself in a way that games rarely do, but actually is pretty common for VTubers. Unlike most games that got a sequel, the existence of Overwatch 2 directly killed its predecessor. Overwatch 1 was taken offline for Overwatch 2's release, meaning that the changes introduced in the sequel were ones that would have to be sufficient. You couldn't just decide you preferred how Sombra played in Overwatch 1 over Overwatch 2 and go back and play her. You get what you get at this point, whether or not you're upset. Typically when a new game comes out, the old game still exists. It can still be played. You know, you can go back and play an old Halo game if you don't like the new ones, but you can't go back and play Overwatch 1. While this is rare for gaming, VTubers experience this whenever they get a new model. There's a lot of reasons to get one, in the same way that there's a lot of reasons to update a character's design in a sequel. You know, maybe tastes have changed in the years since the original design was created and you want to reflect that, either in terms of audience tastes or your own. Maybe your original design was lacking something that you wanted later, and the redesign offers an opportunity to right that wrong. Maybe, especially in the case of VTubers, you didn't really have the resources to fully realize your vision the first go round, and so after a few years, you're finally able to afford an upgrade. And just like with games, VTubers also face blowback for their redesigns. It is a scary prospect to redesign a character people have grown potentially pretty attached to, especially if it's a dramatic one that changes the artist. Like, I've personally wanted a 2.0 for a long time, but I wasn't sure how people would react, especially because my artist is no longer active. No one really seems to know where she actually is at this point. She just disappeared. So if I ever got a 2.0, it would have to be a new design. And I've seen how other people have reacted to other VTubers who've had models from my artist who've gotten new art styles. It's been mixed sometimes. And like, after all, this model has been my face to you guys for about 2.5 years now. Over 2 million views, nearly 100 years worth of watch time, and nearly twice as many subscribers as my hometown's population later. And it's hard to really know how people would handle it if I didn't look like, well, like me as far as you're concerned. Like, it's like showing up to a family event and all of a sudden a family member is just a different person. Well, okay, maybe not a family member. I don't know how parasocial you guys are with me. We'll say like you showed up to work and your coworker is just a different person. And that's before even getting into all the streams. There are people who have spent literally hundreds of hours themselves just hanging out with me with this face. And what, am I just supposed to come back with a new one and pretend everything's normal? Especially because, like, what if I came back with a model that was substantially different from the current one? Like, what if I made him buff? Would people think it was weird that I was like trying to live out some wish fulfillment? What if I made the change and you didn't know about it because you didn't watch me and you came back a few months later and all of a sudden you were like, who the fuck is this? Like, I kind of get why the Overwatch character designers, while they probably felt constrained by having to stick so close to their 1.0s, probably also felt some relief at knowing that they wouldn't have to risk the ire of the fandom by being obligated to make a big change to anyone. They certainly made changes, and some of them were pretty substantial, but nothing that was likely to result in the kind of shitstorm you sometimes do see around redesigned characters and sequels. And that's not to say it's always negative. Sometimes it does go in a generally positive direction. Arcane led Riot to change the designs of a bunch of their characters, and while not all of them are universally beloved, some of them do actually have a lot more depth, and people do seem to like them a lot more. And that thing about depth is actually also kind of by design sometimes. Sometimes when you're starting with something new, you want to leave it a bit more open-ended so you have more room to grow outward once you know what you're looking for. I mean, that's why this model is basically just a guy. Like, if you are familiar with VTubers, which I know a lot of my audience isn't, for a lot of people, I am the only VTuber they watch, but if you're familiar with them, you know that this is extremely tame. My best friends are some variety of dog boy or cat boy or cartoon character. Like, there's a lot of variety out there. I am very neutral, and that's because I didn't really know what I wanted. So I just went with something simple that I could eventually adjust down the road. He doesn't have many immediately distinctive design elements, or at least not ones of his own. The bodysuit is the only thing I kind of designed myself, and I think it's safe to argue that it is not the best piece of fictional fashion out there. And if you take off his clothes, he's just a generic blonde twink, like there's a billion of him out there in fiction. He gets compared to characters all the time. Plus, redesigns imply narrative, both within the fiction and also within the meta-narrative. They imply lore. They imply that a character deliberately changed in some way, and that implication makes you think more about them, makes you think about what it could mean. Genji, to my mind, is one of the more dramatic Overwatch 2 transformations because his changes do a lot to soften him. He's no longer just a cyber ninja, he's wearing actual clothes, for one. He's a different person than he was when we first met him in the mid-2010s. And like I said, it's not just the narrative, it can be the meta-narrative, it can imply something external. Mortal Kombat X comes to mind again, where people interpreted the redesigns to not just mean that characters might have chosen to dress differently, but that designers were caving to an external pressure to desexualize their characters. You could also pretty easily argue that the move to Mortal Kombat 9 and the increased sexualization was also done as a result of an external motivation, but that's for another time. If I redesigned my model, what would be the narrative about him? About me? Would it be that I was unsatisfied with my current design? If I made him skinnier, buffer, taller, fatter, shorter, or whatever else, how would that be interpreted? What would it say about me that I would make a dramatic change? If I made a 2.0 where it was largely the same as it was before in the vein of the Overwatch redesigns, maybe a slightly different base outfit, maybe a new hairstyle, maybe some new style references or whatever else, would people think it was worth it? If I don't know, once again used a video about Overwatch's character design as a way to surprise debut a new VTuber model, would people find it cliche? Well, I sure hope not. Part 4. We learn to live with change. So yeah, this whole video was once again basically just a vehicle for me to talk through the process of designing and debuting a new model. Surprise! Model design is by Gasai, rigging is by Sil, both of them are extremely talented and I'll be linking them both below. I have been working on this for a while now. I first reached out to Gasai back in January and this has been sort of in the background of this entire year. I was getting art and assets and all kinds of stuff prepared in the background so he'd be ready to go, and while I am very excited to talk about him more at the end of this video, I do still have to finish this one because we are not done yet. However, I do need to give a special mention to the Wu Yang skin that they released while I was in the middle of getting my model rigged that is literally just a dead ringer for the 2.0, at least in terms of hair. Like, let me just show you a handful of the messages I got within hours of that skin being announced. It's kind of uncanny, and I just wanted on the record that I had the design first, it was finished, it was already in the process of being rigged, I didn't just rip him off. Like, I pinky swear, my actual reference for the hair was, as any true fan of this channel would know, Haesung from Buried Stars. Anyways, the challenges that come with designing a character for a sequel are going to always be complex, but especially in the live service era, they don't just end once the game is out. For games like Overwatch, release is just the beginning, and once it's released into the world, it's about how you'll get people used to them. There are a few options there as well, and Overwatch basically just picked the most compromise it possibly could. New designs are the base for Overwatch 2 skins going forward, but you're always welcome to go back to the old outfits. When I was getting this 2.0 done, I actually considered getting his original outfit done as an alternate for it, but I realized that it probably wouldn't be worth it. After all, I loved my 1.0 for a lot of reasons, but I also really had moved past him in a lot of ways. The outfit felt very, well, for lack of a better word, unoriginal. Nearly every piece of him came from elsewhere, and it didn't feel particularly interesting to me anymore. I had learned a lot, and I'd grown a lot, and it no longer suited what I felt like I could be. There's also an element of what I guess you could call, like, aesthetic creep. A visual parallel to power creep where aesthetics keep on moving into a more dramatic position to try and stand in contrast to one another. And eventually it becomes sort of necessary to do a redesign to make sure you can texturally still fit the design where you want it to be. When I made my original 1.0 model, I thought he was a twunk. Then I got involved with VTubers and realized basically immediately that he's the most flat twink to ever exist. And that is a problem that's really only gotten more exacerbated with time. If I wanted him to scan that way, he had to be adjusted to look like that contextually. And then I went with Gasai as my artist, and Gasai does not really do skinny little twinks. This is, again, something that Overwatch and other games have had to deal with. A decade after Overwatch came out and changed the game, they needed to reckon with how their characters stood in contrast with the other characters around them, both in other games and in their own. It's also worth remembering that Overwatch is not what it once was in terms of cultural sway. Back in the day, they could get away with some bullshit like a cyber ninja and a cowboy and a blue sniper lady assassin and all that other shit because they were that girl. There are really only two times when you can get away with bullshit, and it's when you're either nobody or when you are the somebody. When you're nobody, nobody cares, and when you are somebody, you don't have to care. Lady Gaga was doing all that shit in an IKEA parking lot and then on stage at the AMAs, you know? Like, you don't have to care in those two positions. When Overwatch first came out, it was the it girl, the ITGIRL, yes, I did spell that right, of gaming. Few games in recent years have had so much anticipation or burst onto the scene with so much love right away. Modern Overwatch isn't like that. They can't get away with as much anymore, and that's probably part of why they've decided to tone it down in Overwatch 2 with new characters. Ramattra is a character they could have easily gotten away with in Overwatch 1, but he does not stand on his own very well in a flop era, because now you have people being critical about it and no one's really as interested in suspending their disbelief. They were willing to overlook all the implications, TM, about the Junkers and what they did to the Omnics in the Outback back in 2016, but they're not really willing to overlook them when it comes to Ramattra in 2022. When it comes to being a VTuber, or even just a content creator in general, whether we're talking YouTube videos or Twitch streams or even media like music or whatever, there is a really fine line to walk in terms of how polished you can look. If you burst onto the scene with an $8,000 model and 4 outfits and all kinds of crazy shit, people are going to look at you a bit sideways. Like, it looks like you're trying to just buy your way to an audience. On the flip side, if you start to get bigger and bigger and your shit still looks busted, people don't necessarily take you as seriously. The real sweet spot is to always make people come away thinking, wow, I'm surprised you're not bigger than you are. You want them always looking at you as someone who's punching above their weight class, doing shit that no one would expect from someone your size. Like, you don't want to be getting any comments that are like, yeah, you look like this is about where you belong. Like, you look like you belong around like 5,000 subs. And you also don't want to go too far and get comments where people are like, you look like you think you're a bigger creator than you are. You're trying to be Dash at the end of The Incredibles, aiming for a close second so you always look impressive, but not like the head honcho. You don't want to draw too much attention to how good you are. You want to look like you could always be better, but you're pretty damn good where you're at. And that's a big struggle point for Overwatch because, frankly, it's hard being on top. When you're that big, you can't do shit right no matter what you do. There's a point at which you can't grow more, but also can't necessarily maintain what you already have. Knowing how to design characters to retain players is hard when you're coming from the place that Overwatch is in. You know, if you do watch big VTubers, you'll notice that they very rarely make such a dramatic shift in art styles as I have between my 1.0 and 2.0. There's just kind of a lot less for them to gain than there is for me. When you see me make a big dramatic change, it just looks like I have more money than I did in 2022, that I found more success with content creation to be able to afford a better model, and that I'm upgrading because it suits me. Plus, when it comes to me, I'm ultimately just not a very big creator in the grand scheme of things. Like, sure, I've had some videos that have popped off, and there's a very real chance that nothing I make on YouTube for a long time will ever surpass the stuff I made with my 1.0. Maybe nothing ever will for me, but that's just kind of how it goes. And it's not like I haven't done this before. Longtime viewers of the channel will remember that once upon a time, I was just a little Sombra skull logo thing in the corner of the screen. My biggest video that I made during that era was the survivorship bias video, and I didn't surpass that in terms of view count until the inescapable video last year, and then again with the sexualizing men one this year. It's still my third most viewed video, and of the videos I made pre-VTuber, around 4 of them are still in my top 10. Like, I didn't make that many of them either, like, they've kind of just stuck around. My point is that whatever I do now will never really be able to outright overshadow what I did before, or at least probably not for a very long time. My biggest impact on the world will almost certainly be the inescapable video, and I'm at peace with that. However, I'm a small creator who popped off a couple times. I'm not Overwatch, a game which can not only probably never overshadow the era of the world could always use more heroes, but which also has so much nostalgia tied up in what it once was. People go back and look at old Overwatch cinematics and get sad that that didn't continue. They get nostalgic for the Overwatch 1 UI. They look back on modes and maps that everyone hated at the time and are like, man, I wish we could have 2CP back. Blizzard doesn't have the luxury that NetherRealm has with Mortal Kombat either, where every few years they can make a sequel where they redesign everyone, add some new characters, and get rid of some old ones that they don't really have space for. I mean, they could do that, and honestly, they probably would be better off if they did, but that's not the live service model. Everyone in Overwatch is in there for the long haul, and the way they were in 2016 is likely how they'll forever be at the core, even if they get some superficial overhauls. Making a character persist in culture over the years is really hard. There aren't many that remain compelling in the long term relative to how many get created, all things considered. How do you make that last? How do you strike gold? Overwatch has brilliant character design, to be clear, and a lot of them do manage to persist, but how do you balance that with the fact that almost none of these characters are ever even seen in their actual, canonical outfits? They're playing dress up 99% of the time. Well, there's not really a simple answer to that, but at some point, it's kind of just about exposure therapy. One day you played a push match of Overwatch and forgot to think of it as that new shitty Overwatch 2 mode. It's just a shitty Overwatch mode. You don't look at Sojourn and Kiriko and Junker Queen as specifically Overwatch 2 characters, they're just Overwatch characters. You don't look at the new Genji base design and think of it as his redesign, you just think of it as his design. You don't look at Sombra's Virus or Roadhog's Pigpen and think of them as new Overwatch 2 abilities, but just Overwatch abilities. Part of why Blizzard probably wanted Overwatch 2 to fully kill Overwatch 1 is that that was really the only way to be able to hope that one day people might be normal about Overwatch 2. Relatively speaking, at least. Without being able to go back to Overwatch 1, you kind of don't have a choice between 1 or 2. 2 is here to stay, and you can either get on board or get lost. That's kind of how it is with the 2.0 as well. I'm sure there are some people who've never watched a video of mine before who don't really give a shit, like they're just watching, they like the design, they don't, who cares? But some of you have probably been watching me for a few years now, and I'm sure when the design first popped up, there was a bit of a mixed reaction internally. I hope people liked it, I like it a lot more, but change is hard. I'm sure a lot of people immediately thought, oh, I don't know about this one, like this is a bit jarring. And understandably, it is. Like, look at the side by side, look at the material. You can be the judge of it. And yet look at you. It's only been a few minutes and you're still here, and I bet that jarring feeling is starting to fade just a bit by now. 6 months from now, if I'm lucky enough that you're still here, you might go back and watch one of the videos with the 1.0 and be a little bit shocked at how different it looks to what you remembered. Sometimes I go back and watch old Overwatch 1 footage and think, like, wow, what the fuck was that? Not even necessarily as a pure negative, but just, it's so different from what I remembered, you know? Or what I thought I remembered. Like, I can know intellectually that there is a difference between Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2, but I sometimes kind of forget how stark that difference feels and how much has changed until I go back and look at Overwatch 1 again for real. And ultimately, Overwatch 1 feels a bit foreign to me now. I didn't realize how different it felt from the game I've gotten used to for the last 3 years, whether it's the characters, the UI, or whatever else. I've completely forgotten what it feels like to vote for player cards at the end of the match, the coin flips of Season 1, the way that kill icons used to just be a generic kill symbol, and like the list of those things goes on and on and on. There is a nostalgia for what once was, for sure, and I'm not just saying that that's something that other people experience. I experienced nostalgia too. A lot of people don't know this, I also was a content creator back in like 2018, 2019. Like, there is a period of Overwatch that is very near and dear to my heart in Overwatch 1, the 6v6. Like, I am very much so afflicted by this as much as anyone else is. But with that nostalgia, there's also the feeling that I don't know if I'd want it back even if I could have it. I loved the original. I loved what it did for me. Some of my best friends to this day are people I met because of Overwatch 1. But the sequel is what I have now. And I know that one day I'm going to look back on the sequel the same way I do with the original. Every now and then I realize that my favorite skin for an Overwatch character is one based on their 2.0 design. Which, speaking of, I kind of forgot to mention that my 2.0 design also has a couple new outfits. They weren't rigged and ready to go in time for this on account of me not having infinite money to get them all rigged right away, but hey, it's on the table too now. Maybe I can do that one day. Maybe I'll use them down the road to portray different characters like I'm in some sort of a Socratic debate. Like a VTuber ContraPoints minus the commitment to destroying my own legacy by never shutting the fuck up. The one I have on now is the default, but who knows? Maybe one day I'll pick a different skin and never look back. Maybe one day my 1.0's outfit will feel like a distant memory. Maybe, just like how I do with Overwatch 1, I'll have to actually go back and watch the footage to remember what it looked like. But ultimately, what was special to me about Overwatch 1 and what still is special to me about it and its characters isn't something like the color of Sombra's leggings or the fact that Genji wasn't wearing pants or whatever else. It was Overwatch 1. It was all the characters, not just their accessories. In a sense, while the character design of Overwatch does carry it, the challenge in updating the designs of those characters for Overwatch 2 wasn't in trying to one-up the originals or try to replace them. It was to try and find a way to more truthfully, accurately, and honestly portray who they are at their core today. It was to take advantage of improved hardware, of years of time spent familiarizing themselves with the characters to the point that it feels essential to see them grow and change how they present themselves. It was to look at characters that people loved and answer the question, how do we hone in on what they loved and show that to the world even more than before? Updating a character's design is risky business. It is possible to fuck up and fuck up badly, and risk alienating people who maybe didn't even realize how attached they were to how they once looked until it was gone. Maybe this new design is off-putting to you in some way. Hell, to be perfectly honest with you, when I first started getting sketches back for him, I found myself instinctively trying to get Gasai to pull the design back to something more similar to the 1.0. You know, a little bit skinnier, a little bit more covered, a little bit more referential to whatever came before it. By the time this video is out though, I'm very prepared to leave the 1.0 behind me for a bit. Like, maybe I'll bring him out every now and then for fun the way I'd put Sombra in one of her 1.0 skins, but this is who Viveros is now. You guys haven't had all of 2025 to get used to the idea like I have, so I get it if it's a bit weird to start with, but I hope you'll stick with me and get to love the new design like I do. Anyways, this is functionally the end of the video, and I really hope you've enjoyed it. RIP to the 1.0 and the model artist who made him and then disappeared and nobody's seen her basically since I debuted that model. I don't know if Gasai and Sil are watching this video. If you are, thank you. But if you are, also, just as a heads up, neither of you are allowed to suddenly disappear in the next 3 to 6 months or people are going to start thinking there's a pattern. Being a bit more serious, I do have some serious thank yous at this point. Gasai did all the design work for me, including ref sheets and the model itself, and I truly cannot thank him enough. Back in January, I'd been joking with my friend Tenchi about how I was jealous that his model was a Koto Gasai project because Gasai was one of my favorite artists of all time, and he connected us, and the rest is history. Having a model by Gasai is legitimately such an honor to me, and if you're not familiar with Gasai's work, I strongly encourage you to wait until you're not in a public place to look it up if you do. It's a very cool feeling to get to be one of his first VTuber children, and so thank you again for everything, Gasai. As well, Sil was the rigger for this model and made this very cute art piece of him as well. She's also one of my longtime favorite artists and an incredible rigger, and it has been a dream to work with her on this. Most people know that I'm the one who rigged my original model, or if you didn't, now you do. Ever since that happened though, I have known that if I was going to get a 2.0, it would be professionally rigged. Seeing the model move for the first time back in August was such a cool feeling. And it was the moment where I really realized like this was going to be me going forward, and I hope everyone appreciates how much better I can actually emote now. As well, thank you to Neil for the new background. Back when I first started VTubing, I felt like my best bet was to keep the model small and in the corner so that he wasn't so obtrusive for people who didn't like VTubing, and also, because I wasn't super confident in my rigging of it. But over time, I realized I wanted to have a bit more of a video essay setup for him. I wanted the model to be a little bit more front and center. I also didn't want to have to go and get a bunch of random footage from various games to make my videos because trust me, it takes so much goddamn time. And so I really just wanted to have something that kind of suited him. And Neil absolutely killed it. While a lot of stuff is going to be changing on the channel, some stuff won't. Enzo created my original branding for me way back in 2023, and I still absolutely love it to this day. The flower icon he designed is incorporated into my actual design this go round, like it's on the chest, as well as the diamond and the star iconography that included in the branding. I would show you the stars, like you can see the diamonds on the hip and on the little arm strap thing, but the stars are incorporated in the form of a Brent Corrigan style ass tattoo, so that won't be happening on YouTube. Regardless, while a lot of stuff is changing, I wanted to make a point of thanking Enzo for what he made for me. Also, one of the staples of this channel for a while now has been my little wiggler that accompanies me in some of my videos, and I'm happy to announce that he'll be getting a 2.0 update from Leah. I know we just did the 1.0 wiggler pin thing, and while I'm hoping nobody's upset about that happening with the 2.0 coming so soon, wanted to just let you know that I'm going to be seeing about getting a 2.0 version of the pin done down the road as well, and if that goes ahead, then I'll find a way to offer some sort of a discount for anyone who pre-ordered the 1.0. I also just want to show off a bit of the art that I got for him here. Not all of it is safe for YouTube, but I wanted to make sure I didn't just get a brand new model without any new art for him to kind of show him off a bit more. Also, I finally have a new profile picture. This one is by the very talented Sketchy, and it turned out absolutely lovely, so thank you very much for taking this one on, Sketchy. We also have art pieces by a ton of extremely talented artists you can see on screen right now that are already ready to go like I mentioned. Some of which, like I said, can't be shown here, but you can find them on Twitter if you're curious. And I have been absolutely loving seeing how it's being interpreted so far. Also, special shout out to everybody who knew about this and kept it a secret. I would have gone fucking insane if I'd had to keep this to myself for literally an entire year, and being able to keep this a surprise has meant that so many people had to be willing to work around me on that front. Like dozens of people, and only a couple of them accidentally leaked it on a Twitch stream while they were drunk. But I think they played it off pretty well, so it's okay. I am extremely grateful to Gasai and Sil and every other artist who is a part of this for being willing to commit time to work on this privately outside of streams and the content that they already produce just to keep the secret. And it really does mean a lot to me. Every artist mentioned or shown here did an incredible job and was so sweet about the new design, and I can't thank them enough. I also want to thank my friends for putting up with me ranting about the 2.0 for months on end, and I am sure they are more excited than anybody about this because it means that I am making this everyone else's problem instead of just theirs. Before we wrap it up, there's also some content stuff. The re-debut Donathon, which yes, that's what this actually is. It wasn't just a 3rd anniversary Donathon. That's happening right now. It's going to be a capped Donathon, meaning that it'll have a finite endpoint. This is mostly because I couldn't really get the time off of work to do an uncapped one, but regardless, here's how it's going to work. Any contributions made during the month of October, including the few days that have already passed on YouTube, Patreon, Twitch, or as a direct donation through the link in the description, will be counted towards both individual and community goals. As well, if you've heard about my content plans for October, you know I'm planning to put out a ton of videos this month. And now you know why too. I want to show them off a bit more and help people get a bit more used to them, and with 5 more videos planned for October, there will be a lot of opportunities for exposure therapy. The schedule is October 5th, making a mascot or ruining a character. October 12th, what it means to hate a game for content. October 19th, uh-oh, I gave myself body dysmorphia with my VTubing model because I'm stupid, what now? October 26th, Gen AI is a society-wide prisoner's dilemma and we are not going to solve it in time. October 31st, I can't enjoy horror and it makes me miserable. Lastly, some channel membership stuff. There's a member's choice poll for October going on right now between these 4 topics. How buried stars get social media toxicity right. This video would be a return to Buried Stars, focusing specifically on how it portrays social media toxicity through its Twitter stand-in Fader, and how that toxicity impacts each of the characters differently. What does it mean to perform poorly? This video would be about how we evaluate performance and how our understanding of performance metrics is counterintuitive, both in gaming spaces and beyond. What's the price of a game? This video would be about the discussion people are having about the price of Switch games, AAA games, and indie games, focusing on what it would even mean to try and decide what the price of a game should be. Oblivion, Skyrim, and how limitations can make games better. This video would argue that Oblivion's relatively more restrictive gameplay and mechanics actually allow the player to make more choices and explore more freedom than Skyrim's open-ended approach to skills, combat, and progression. Voting on this poll will be open until the end of the day on October 10th, and if you want to become a member, you can do so for $5 a month on Patreon or YouTube. My channel members not only play a huge role in supporting my content, but also are a big part of why I was able to afford to make this upgrade. If you'd like to join them and contribute to the donathon in the process, make sure to become a member at those links to vote for one of these topics. Finally, thank you very much to all my channel members. At the $25 Elite membership tier, thank you to Adele and Robot Juice. At the $10 Premium membership tier, thank you to Tortoise, Andrew Tenar, Bailey Nichols, Cavi Corbin, Corianders, Theo, and NJD. At the $5 channel membership tier, thank you to Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Nemo the Survivor, Destiny, Cadence, Marsh Alice, Gavos, Crimson Cyclo, Corey, MV, The Only Enigma, Mariah, Amon Dodley, Meat Cubed, Noisy Pitta, Harv, Marcy Gaskill, Deku _ Sifon, Lala the Bambi, JMD Toaster, Ginkgo, Teo Tamara, Please Like Me, and Puddinsis. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or you just clicked on this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.